Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi RYBRC expanded 8-inch brush cutter attachment. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off with the included handle, and it's not a great start, unfortunately, for Ryobi here. The included extra handle, while the shape is perfectly fine and will give you a lot of control over where you're maneuvering the trimmer or weird angles, is not, well, properly secured to the body of the trimmer. The included mounting point is going to be a bolt with a wing nut, and you will tighten it down on the shaft of the trimmer head where it indicates on the shaft, and theoretically it should stay in place. Theoretically. Unfortunately, in reality, it still spins even when you tighten it down with a pair of pliers. Unfortunately, if you use the included nylon or plastic wing nut, it's going to break it almost immediately. And even when you replace it with a metal wing nut, you still will not be able to get it tight enough to keep it from rotating. So at the end of the day, I'm not a huge fan of the included extra handle or the mounting choice they decided to go with here. And I really think Ryobi needs to revisit some of their designs in the future, just because, well, when you're operating a tool with a large metal spinning disc at the other end, it's probably a good idea to maintain full control over that particular tool at all times. And unfortunately, when you have a handle that rotates easily, that really does not inspire a lot of confidence in your control over the tool. And I'm also not a big fan of the foam that they decided to go with for the handle of the tool. It feels like about the cheapest foam that you could possibly find on the market, and it's too easy to depress, and it's also an open cell design, which means it's more prone to faster deterioration or rot than, say, a closed cell design. So yeah, overall the included extra handle is just not great, and I would recommend using the original handle that came with your trimmer if that is an option for you, as long as it, well, doesn't rotate. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'm not a fan of this handle, and I think it needs a redesign. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the brush cutter attachment's attaching point, and I'm going to say it gets a pass. Unlike on the Heart pole saw, which I reviewed a month or two ago, this particular attachment stays in place and will not rotate once you have it all tightened in and locked into place. And I haven't had any issues when I've used it, and I've used it quite extensively over the last summer. So, quite frankly, I really don't have any complaints here, and everything gets a pass. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the shaft of the brush cutter. Now, the shaft on this particular brush cutter is going to be made out of metal and is going to be about 31 inches from the top of the shaft to the base of the shaft down by where the brush cutter actually is located. Overall, I don't really have any complaints about it. It's made out of metal, which is going to make it a little bit heavier, but it's going to be less expensive than, say, a attachment that's made out of carbon fiber or something like that. And I haven't had any issues with it getting bent or becoming detached or, you know, just becoming, you know, unusable in any sort of way. So, quite frankly, everything here works as intended, and I don't really think there's any major problems. So we can go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the guard. Now, the guard on this particular tool is actually fairly heavy duty. It's made out of a fairly thick metal and will definitely protect you from any sort of flying debris that might come flying back at you as long as you are standing behind it. Overall, it is a good design. However, if you are planning on trying to attach a different sort of blade to this particular trimmer, you are going to have to probably modify the guard in order to do that. And that's going to be rather difficult, especially if you're looking to attach a, well, basic circular saw blade. It's not impossible, but generally you're going to have to modify the guard with an angle grinder, as in cut off part of the guard, in order to make a third-party market blade work with this particular trimmer, which is not something I personally recommend doing, but it is an option, and, well, it will be up to you if you choose to go that route. But at the end of the day, the guard is completely adequate, and I don't really have any complaints, and I think it will do a good job at protecting you. So yeah, moving on. And last but not least, we have the blade. Now, the blade on this particular tool is a tri-arc blade, which means it's going to work great for cutting through pretty much any sort of weed that is not made out of wood. If it's made out of wood, you're going to be out of luck, because this blade is not great at cutting through wood. But your usual culprit of weed that trimmer line doesn't work with will stand no chance against this particular blade. And the blade itself is going to be able to survive just about anything you hit it against because of how, well, thick and heavy duty it is. They do sell replacement blades. I doubt you'll ever need to buy one, but they do sell them. It's something good to know, I guess. And quite frankly, I don't really have any major complaints about this particular blade when it's in use against, well, weeds. But if your goal is to cut out weeds and, say, small saplings, it's not really going to get the job done. This is pretty much exclusively a, well, blade for cutting weeds. So yeah, just keep that in mind before purchasing this particular, well, brush cutter, because quite frankly, I think large weed cutter would be a more appropriate name for it than brush cutter, because brush usually refers to something that has wood, but I digress. But with that being said, if you are looking for something a little bit beefier to tackle those larger weeds that trimmer line just can't cut through, this will get the job done. Moving on. Okay, now the brush cutter attachment without a power head attached to it weighs 1,606 grams, which is about 3.5 pounds. So it's a little bit on the heavy side, but it's still completely usable. And with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this trimmer in use. Okay, in use, this particular brush cutter attachment is going to work great on any of those weeds that are currently making fun of your trimmer line and giving you a headache in that regard. But one thing this particular blade is not good at is going to be cutting through any sort of material that is more wood in nature. Think rabbit brush or saplings. It just doesn't have the sharp edges needed to cut through those objects. And I would highly recommend looking at a circular saw or chainsaw blade for those particular problems. But when it comes to your average garden variety weed that, well, is resistant to trimmer line, this thing will do a good job and make short work of them. Now, the one thing about this particular attachment is that it is a little bit on the front heavy side, which means that if you're going to be using it for long extended periods of time, it's important to pick the proper power head to use with it. I think the gas power head is a good option, as well as the 40 volt power head, but the 18 volt power head is just a little bit too light on the back end for, well, comfortable user experiences over long periods of time. It's not impossible, and the 18 volt power head still is powerful enough to run it. It's just not going to be the best overall experience. But like I said already, it still is usable. So yeah, I don't really have any major complaints about this tool in use, and I've used it for, well, several large projects, and it's done a good job. Other than the fact that it only has an 8-inch blade, I don't think it really has any other major shortcomings, well, except for that handle, that dreadful, awful handle that Ryobi should be ashamed of. And, well, that's about it. It's a perfectly usable tool, and it will get the job done, and it will save you money on trimmer line if you're willing to dish out for how much this particular tool costs. But we'll cover that here in a second. But with that being said, let's go over the pros and cons of this particular tool. Works great on large weeds. If you have any sort of large weeds that just make fun of your normal trimmer line, this thing will cut them down to size without mercy, which is a pro in my opinion. 18 volt 40 volt gas. This will work with all of Ryobi's expanded power heads, and it doesn't have any major shortcomings on any of them, so this is a pro in my opinion. Tough blade. Overall, the blade on this particular tool is very tough, and if you do end up breaking it, what the heck were you doing? But that being said, I do consider this to be a pro. Handle and sling. I do like the fact that they included a sling and a handle. I just would like it if they would actually include a workable handle without the need of having to modify it in order for it to stay in place. So with that being said, I am grateful for the extra handle because it does allow you to have more control over the tool, but you will have to modify it in order for it to work correctly. Moving on. Front heavy. This isn't that big of a deal, but the front end of the tool is definitely a little bit on the heavy side when you are using it with the 18 volt trimmer. Like I said, not a big deal, but it's not really a con, it's not really a pro, it's just meh. Okay, the first con would be the price. Coming in at $120, this is definitely an overpriced tool. I would consider $60 to $70 an acceptable price for it, but anything above that, you're out of luck, Ryobi. If you want to purchase this tool and get it on a cheaper, more friendly budget, I would highly recommend looking at Tool Direct or just picking up the Heart version at Walmart since they're identical. So yeah, moving on. Handle mounting. The handle mounting is garbage, and Ryobi needs to reconsider how they design the handles on their trimmers. Moving on. Limited blade options. Overall, there aren't very many different options for you to choose from when it comes to replacing the blade on this particular trimmer because of how the guard is well mounted. The guard is good, but it does limit the amount of blades you can use with this particular tool, which is, well, kind of a con. Moving on. Okay, that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this trimmer attachment. I have to say that when it comes to working against your standard variety of weeds that trimmer line doesn't work on, this does a fine job. However, considering the price point, it makes it rather hard to recommend this particular tool, and the fact that the handle that it comes with is kind of, well, garbage. So if you are able to pick this particular tool up for, say, around $60 to $70, I would recommend it. But at $120, I think there are other options on the market that will be, well, far superior and will do a better job. So with that being said, this tool comes recommended if you can buy it on sale. Okay, that is it for this video. This video's been kind of sitting around for a while and I haven't been able to finish it. So now that it's a nasty, cold, negative 10 degrees outside, it seemed like a great time to talk about a trimmer video that, well, has to do with summer. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed it, and if you liked it, please like and subscribe.